I spent 8 years building a system meant to protect the world. 8 years buried in cold labs, writing code that could stop billion-dollar breaches before they even happened. And then one morning, my own brother looked me in the eye and said I was done because I skipped his birthday party. "Don't ever think you're bigger than family," he told me. I froze. Everything I had sacrificed, late nights, missed birthdays, relationships put on hold, boiled down to a single moment of judgment, delivered with champagne-stained arrogance. It wasn't about the party. It was about control, about proving who was in charge. He didn't see the years of relentless dedication, the nights I spent debugging vulnerabilities that could have cost the company millions, the sleepless nights fueled by nothing but coffee and determination. To him, loyalty was conditional, and apparently, skipping a celebration was a crime worthy of exile. That same night, while he was still drunk on power and champagne, the company servers went dark. And for the first time, he realized who really owned the code. The silence of that system was louder than any words, louder than any revenge could ever be. Every line I had written, every protocol I had built, every firewall I had installed, it was all under my control. I wasn't just an employee. I was the architect of his empire, the invisible hand that made it all run. I'm Orion Cade Whitlaw, and this is the story of how family loyalty became a weapon and how I turned it into freedom. Before I go any further, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this story unfold? Drop a hi in the comments, or let me know the city or country you're tuning in from. I read every message, and it reminds me that even in moments of betrayal, none of us are truly alone. Because what began as a small act of defiance, the choice to skip a party, would set in motion a chain of events that would reshape my life, my family, and the $940 million empire my brother thought he controlled. This is where the story begins, with betrayal, power, and the first taste of revenge that would echo far beyond a single night. The morning after I was fired, the weight of what happened hadn't fully settled in. My brother strutted around the office like nothing had changed, laughing with the executives as if I had never existed. He didn't realize that every system, every algorithm, every line of code I had written to secure the company and the world was still under my control. And yet, there I was, sitting in my tiny apartment, staring at the screens that had become both my sanctuary and my battlefield. I remember staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop, feeling a mix of rage and clarity. Rage because my own blood had dismissed years of dedication as though they were nothing. Clarity because in that moment I realized the irony. The very empire he thought he controlled, he had built on my mind. My hands had written every line of code that kept his business afloat. And now, the power had shifted without him realizing it. For the first few days, I did nothing publicly. I didn't storm the office. I didn't call anyone. I let the anger simmer. Instead, I walked through the quiet of my apartment, pacing between piles of notebooks filled with algorithms, charts, and server blueprints. Each page reminded me of what I had built and what he had taken for granted. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional. Every late night, every missed celebration, every sacrifice I had made, it all flashed before me like a montage of commitment ignored. And somewhere deep inside, I knew I couldn't let this end here. I started small. I examined the company's network, not to sabotage it, but to understand the vulnerabilities he had overlooked. Months of meticulous coding had created a web of intricate protocols and hidden overrides that only I could access. It was almost poetic. The same brother who had looked down on me for choosing integrity over indulgence had unknowingly handed me the ultimate leverage. And yet, I didn't use it impulsively. Patience was part of the plan. Revenge, after all, is a game of timing. Meanwhile, life outside the apartment continued. My brother threw extravagant parties, boasted at board meetings, and congratulated himself on decisions he didn't understand. I followed from a distance, quietly observing how his empire began to wobble. Small cracks appeared in his judgment. Deals that had once seemed secure were now faltering because he lacked the insight to manage the systems I had built. Employees whispered, clients hesitated, and I stayed invisible, content to watch the seeds of chaos form in the garden he thought was untouchable. But I didn't only focus on revenge. I focused on growth. Nights that I used to spend debugging his code, I now spent building new algorithms, exploring ways to innovate beyond what we had already created. I reached out to mentors I had ignored. For years, delved into advanced systems, and slowly, methodically, expanded my knowledge and influence. It wasn't just about retaliation anymore. It was about creating something unstoppable, a force that could not only survive his mistakes, but thrive because of them. Every day I reminded myself, patience is power. My brother had underestimated me. He thought family loyalty was a chain I couldn't break, a debt I owed him simply because of blood. But loyalty, I realized, is only as strong as the person who chooses it. And I had chosen myself, my growth, and my future. By the end of that first month, I had a plan. The company's servers, the algorithms, the very foundation of his empire, all of it was mine to command. And I was ready. Not out of malice, but because he had forced my hand. Every betrayal, every insult, every moment he dismissed me had been logged, in my memory, recorded as carefully as any code I had ever written. And now it was time for the next phase, the phase where I would show him exactly who had been in control all along. I often wonder if he ever imagined the storm he had unleashed by letting anger override reason. Because while he celebrated the illusion of power, I was quietly building the reality. And reality, unlike perception, doesn't bend to arrogance or ignorance. It only bends to those willing to see clearly, think critically, and act decisively. And that's exactly what I plan to do. By the second month, I had everything I needed. I wasn't just observing anymore. I was preparing to act. Every protocol, every override, every vulnerability I had built into the system became my tool. But this wasn't a reckless move. This was calculated, surgical. My brother had built his empire on my work, but he had never understood it, and that ignorance was about to become my advantage. It started with subtle disruptions. Nothing obvious, nothing that would immediately scream sabotage. A delayed server response here, a misrouted email there. Small enough to seem like glitches, big enough to make him question his leadership. I watched from my apartment as his confident smiles began to falter during board meetings. Executives whispered about technical issues, clients asked for explanations, and he tried to spin it all with charm and empty assurances. But every failed attempt only confirmed one thing. He couldn't do this without me. And then came the night I chose to make my presence known. I had mapped every system, understood every dependency, and created a backdoor that only I could access. That night, while my brother hosted another one of his ostentatious parties, I initiated the algorithm freeze. The servers shut down. Databases locked. Security protocols screamed silently as they refused to acknowledge any commands from anyone other than me. His empire, the one he had laughed about in my face, went dark. He didn't realize immediately. Champagne glass in hand, he laughed at a miscommunication with a client. But then the phones started ringing. The emails stacked. The alarms, silent to me, blared to everyone else. Panic spread across the office like wildfire. For the first time, he saw it, the illusion of control shattered. And then he looked at me, not in person, but in that moment, as if the servers themselves were speaking to him. The person he thought powerless had become unstoppable. I didn't call him. I didn't send messages. I simply waited. The irony was exquisite. My brother had always believed that family loyalty was an unbreakable chain, that I would never act against him. But here I was, exercising that very power he had taken for granted. Every failure, every delay, every misstep he couldn't explain was a reminder that he had underestimated me. By the time he finally realized what had happened, I controlled the narrative. I could have destroyed the company entirely, but that wasn't my goal yet. My goal was to demonstrate who truly held power, to make him understand that loyalty and skill cannot be mocked without consequence. That night, as he struggled to restore servers, I watched silently, knowing that every panic-stricken decision he made only reinforced my position. The next morning, he called me. His tone, usually confident and commanding, was sharp with desperation. "Orion, this has gone too far," he said. I didn't respond. Instead, I sent a single message. Don't ever forget who built this. Don't ever forget who really owns the code. That night marked a turning point. The line had been crossed, the First taste of real power, real control, and real revenge had been served. And while the algorithm still ran under my command, the understanding had been cemented. I was no longer just a subordinate, no longer just the loyal brother. I was the force that dictated terms, and the empire he thought he controlled was now, in every critical way, mine. And yet, even in that moment of triumph, I knew this was only the beginning. Power is a conversation, not a victory. There would be resistance, there would be attempts to reclaim control, and there would be new battles. But for the first time in years, I felt the intoxicating clarity that comes from being underestimated, and then proving that underestimation deadly. The morning after the servers went dark, the office was chaos incarnate. Executives scrambled, clients called in panic, and my brother's confident facade had completely crumbled. I could see it even from the distance of my apartment, through security cameras and monitoring tools. Every moment of his struggle played like a slow-motion revelation. The man who had once spoken to me with authority and condescension now stumbled over simple decisions, his empire temporarily paralyzed by a force he didn't understand. And that force, as he would soon realize, wasn't a hacker or a rival. It was me. For hours, he tried to restore the systems himself. He called IT teams, delegated responsibilities, and even pleaded with longtime employees for guidance. But the truth was painfully clear to everyone who worked in the company. The person who knew every code, every protocol, and every contingency was not in the office, and never had been dependent on anyone's instructions but their own. Every failed attempt to regain control was a lesson he hadn't intended to teach, and yet it was searingly effective. I could have escalated the damage. I could have deleted critical files, exposed sensitive client information, or thrown the entire operation into financial ruin. But this wasn't about destruction. This was about clarity, about teaching a lesson in humility and control, about showing him that loyalty and skill are not interchangeable, and that underestimating someone you dismiss as just family can have consequences far beyond a missed birthday party. Instead, I moved carefully. I allowed the algorithm to continue running under my oversight, subtly correcting critical issues while keeping him aware that he was dependent on me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every frustrated call, every panicked meeting, every decision he struggled to make without my input reinforced the reality. The empire he believed he controlled was only alive because of my intellect and foresight. In the days that followed, I began to feel a strange mix of satisfaction and reflection. Revenge, I realized, isn't just about making someone pay. It's about asserting your worth, reclaiming your dignity, and proving that you are not to be underestimated. I had achieved that, but more importantly, I had reclaimed control over my life, my career, and my future. The algorithm was no longer just a tool, it was a symbol. A testament to the years of effort, sacrifice, and brilliance that my brother had casually dismissed. I also reached out to mentors and old colleagues during this period. I needed to ensure that my influence extended beyond my brother's company. By networking, sharing my ideas selectively, and building alliances, I fortified my position. It wasn't enough to win once. I needed to secure long-term power, influence, and independence. Every conversation I had, every connection I made, added another layer to the fortress I was quietly constructing. And somewhere in the middle of this, I paused and thought about the viewers, the people who might relate to this story of betrayal and triumph. Where are you watching this from? I imagined asking, knowing that some of you might be at home, at work, or even on your own journey of proving yourself against those who underestimated you. If you haven't already, subscribe for more stories of calculated revenge and the lessons hidden within them. By the end of the week, my brother had begun to understand the stakes. The servers were operational again, but under a subtle, unspoken hierarchy, I controlled the system. And he now realized that his authority was conditional. The first wave of my revenge had been executed flawlessly. No destruction, no collateral damage, only clarity. And for the first time in years, I felt the intoxicating mix of justice and power, knowing that the game had just begun. Weeks passed, but the tension in the office never eased. My brother had regained some control of daily operations, but the knowledge that I held the real power weighed heavily on him. Every decision he made was cautious, tentative, as if each step might trigger another wave of disruption. I watched quietly, analyzing his patterns, noting weaknesses he had exposed in his attempts to regain authority. Patience had served me well. But now it was time to escalate, to transform subtle dominance into undeniable control. It began with an email. I sent a single line to his inbox, check the system logs. I suggest you review every access point before making another move. It was vague, almost casual, but the effect was instantaneous. He called meetings, demanded explanations, and combed through digital logs obsessively. The executives, who once respected him without question, were now visibly uncomfortable, unsure whose commands to follow. The fear of unseen control can be more potent than any visible threat, and I had perfected it. But the real climax came when he decided to challenge me directly. One evening, he stormed into my apartment building's lobby, clearly angry and desperate. He didn't know where I was, but he wanted to confront me, to remind me of the family ties he believed still bound me. Little did he know, I had already anticipated this move. Every step he took, every interaction he attempted, had been considered in advance. While he plotted confrontation, I executed the next phase. Using the algorithm, I subtly rerouted key company operations, ensuring that decisions he made without consulting me led to minor but impactful failures. A shipment delayed, a client misinformed, an internal communication misrouted. Each small disruption wasn't enough to destroy, but it was enough to prove a point. Control was no longer his, and by the time he realized the consequences of his actions, it was too late. He was operating under constraints he couldn't see, dictated by a system he didn't understand, and by a brother he had underestimated. That night, I finally allowed him a glimpse of the truth. A message appeared on his terminal. You cannot operate this empire without me. Every line of code, every protocol, every safeguard, I built it all, and I decide who controls it. I didn't need to be present. The system itself spoke on my behalf. The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. For the first time in our lives, he was truly powerless, dependent entirely on the very person he had fired and belittled. Yet even in victory, I remained strategic. I didn't humiliate him publicly. I didn't destroy relationships or expose secrets. This wasn't about vengeance for entertainment. It was about making him understand, deeply and irrevocably, that power is earned, trust is not blind, and loyalty can be wielded as both shield and weapon. The algorithm, once a tool for safeguarding the world, had become an instrument of justice and a lesson in humility. And in the quiet after the storm, I allowed myself a small smile. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming everything he thought he owned, but more importantly, I had done it with precision, intelligence, and patience. The game had reached a critical point. My brother had been humbled, but the full extent of my plan was still unfolding. The morning after the algorithm displayed its quiet dominance, the atmosphere in the company was palpably different. My brother, once so brash and arrogant, moved through the halls with caution. He didn't shout or command anymore. He questioned, hesitated, and second-guessed himself at every turn. The subtle shift in the power dynamic was undeniable. Employees who had once deferred to him now looked at me, even from afar, with curiosity and, in some cases, quiet respect. I knew the lesson had been delivered, but my work wasn't done. Controlling the company wasn't simply about shutting systems down or causing panic. It was about establishing an enduring hierarchy where my influence was absolute, yet invisible. The beauty of my approach lay in restraint. I allowed my brother to retain the illusion of authority, but every decision he made was subtly guided by the system I controlled. He still had his title, his office, his meetings, and his social power, but the backbone of his empire, the pulse that kept it alive, belonged entirely to me. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in quiet dominance. I monitored every process, corrected critical errors before they escalated, and ensured the algorithm optimized operations in a way that made the company more profitable, efficient, and secure than ever before. It was a paradoxical situation. My brother received accolades for successes I engineered, while I silently built influence that extended far beyond the office walls. Every interaction, every choice, every minor crisis handled under my supervision reinforced a truth he couldn't unsee. I was indispensable. Emotionally, the satisfaction was immense. I didn't need vindictive displays or public humiliation. The knowledge that he had underestimated me for years, that he had dismissed my sacrifices and loyalty as insignificant, was enough. Every nervous glance he cast, every faltering instruction he issued, reminded me of the power of foresight and patience. And yet, I remained aware that real revenge is a measured game. It's not about one victory, but a series of deliberate moves that culminate in undeniable authority. During this period, I also reflected on the personal cost of betrayal and revenge. It wasn't just about money, control, or power. It was about reclaiming my self-worth, proving my competence, and redefining what family loyalty meant. I had learned that true influence comes from intelligence, persistence, and restraint, not shouting or titles. Every decision I made reinforced this lesson, both for me and, indirectly, for him. I often pause to consider the audience watching this story unfold. Have you ever been underestimated by someone you trusted? Someone who believed that loyalty alone would bind you to them? I ask because the lessons here are universal. Intelligence, strategy, and patience can shift power in ways no single confrontation ever could. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories that show how calculated patience and cleverness turn betrayal into victory. By the end of the month, the company was running smoother than it had in years. Yet my brother remained subtly aware of his dependency. The algorithm wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a symbol of my triumph, my foresight, and the quiet power that comes from being underestimated. Every move I made, every adjustment I implemented, strengthened my control, and he had no choice but to recognize it. The lesson was complete. Power earned through strategy is far more effective than power seized through arrogance. The first wave of revenge had been executed. Now, I had solidified dominance, ensuring that the empire he once believed he commanded would operate on my terms, invisibly, intelligently, and irrevocably. Even as the company stabilized under my silent control, I knew the game was far from over. My brother had learned a lesson, but arrogance has a way of lingering in even the most humbled minds. And so, I prepared for the next phase, the phase where subtle control would be replaced by undeniable dominance, a moment where he would confront the reality he had ignored for years. It began with an unexpected move from him. One morning, I noticed unusual activity in the system logs. My brother had attempted to override a section of the algorithm without consulting me. It was reckless, impulsive, and dangerous, but predictable. He believed that his title and authority gave him the right to meddle with systems he didn't understand. The moment I saw it, I smiled. Every action he took without foresight created opportunities for me to demonstrate the consequences of underestimating me. I decided to escalate carefully. This time, it wasn't about small glitches or delays. It was about showing him the full weight of the power he had dismissed. I initiated a controlled shutdown of select high-stakes processes, the kind that affected major clients and critical operations. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was noticeable. Panic rippled through the office. Executives scrambled. Calls poured in from clients questioning the sudden disruption. And my brother, standing at the epicenter of the chaos, realized immediately that his attempt to assert authority had failed spectacularly. He tried to rally his team, shouting instructions and demanding updates, but no one could provide solutions without access to the sections I controlled. The irony was exquisite. He had fired me for prioritizing integrity over a party. Yet here he was, dependent entirely on the very person he had dismissed. I had become both the invisible hand and the architect of his empire. And now the consequences of his hubris were unfolding in real time. That night, I sent a single message to his inbox. Control is earned, not inherited. Every misstep you make reinforces that lesson. It was concise, cold, and surgical. The effect was immediate. His demeanor changed. The confident, entitled aura he carried for years dissolved into tension and unease. For the first time, he truly understood the depth of my capabilities. Not just the code, not just the algorithms, but the strategic mind behind them. But the climax wasn't just about demonstrating power. It was about precision. I ensured that all disruptions were temporary, fixable, and reversible, but only by me. Every glitch, every delayed process, every frustrated executive was a calculated lesson in humility. By the time morning came, the company was functioning again, but the psychological impact was irreversible. My brother now approached every decision with caution, consulting me indirectly even without acknowledging it. The balance of power had shifted permanently. In that quiet moment, I reflected on the lesson this story might teach others. Revenge, when executed with strategy and intelligence, is far more powerful than blind retaliation. Patience, observation, and careful calculation turn betrayal into leverage. And sometimes, the most devastating lessons come not from destruction, but from the subtle assertion of skill and authority. Yet even with this victory, I knew the story was far from over. Power, like trust, is never static. Challenges would come, resistance would emerge, and I would have to be ready, not just to maintain control, but to expand it, ensuring that the empire my brother had underestimated would now operate entirely under my guidance, and he would never forget it. The morning after the controlled shutdown, the atmosphere in the office was almost surreal. The company ran smoothly, but the tension was palpable. Employees whispered in corners, glanced nervously at my brother, and consulted me, without ever realizing I wasn't physically present. The subtle psychological shift I had orchestrated was complete. My brother had learned, painfully and permanently, that his perceived authority was fragile, contingent on a system he could not control. I watched from my apartment, sipping coffee as the network dashboards displayed flawless operations. Every minor disruption from the night before had been resolved seamlessly under my oversight, reinforcing the reality that the empire he once commanded now moved to the rhythm of my decisions. My brother's face was etched with frustration and disbelief during meetings, and though he tried to mask it, the signs were undeniable. He had been humbled, not humiliated, and that distinction was important. True revenge, I reminded myself, is measured and deliberate. It teaches, it shapes, and it redefines the rules. I took stock of the broader implications. The algorithm I controlled was no longer just a set of protocols and code. It was a symbol of mastery, patience, and foresight. It demonstrated that intelligence and strategy outlast impulsive power and arrogance. While my brother had relied on inherited authority and family connections, I had relied on knowledge, preparation, and patience. The lesson was clear. Control belongs to those who earn it, not those who assume it. During this period, I also engaged with the world outside the office, sharing selective updates with trusted mentors and industry peers. This wasn't about boasting. It was about expanding influence, building alliances, and creating a safety net that ensured the power I wielded could not be easily challenged. Each connection, each conversation subtly reinforced my presence in the tech world, ensuring that the narrative of skill, patience, and quiet dominance would extend beyond the walls of the company. Emotionally, the experience was transformative. The sense of vindication was profound, but it was coupled with introspection. I understood now that true power is not simply about winning. It is about understanding the stakes, anticipating moves, and exercising control without unnecessary cruelty. My brother had underestimated me, and that mistake would follow him for the rest of his life. But I also realized that revenge is most satisfying when it is paired with personal growth, when it elevates the strategist as much as it humbles the opponent. At one point, I paused and addressed the audience, as if they were in the room with me. "Have you ever been underestimated by someone you trusted?" I asked. Maybe a boss, a friend, or even a family member? Think about that as you watch this story unfold. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories that show how patience, intelligence, and strategy can turn betrayal into victory. The lesson was universal, and the engagement helped me remember that these experiences resonate far beyond my personal story. By the end of this phase, the company was not only stable but thriving in ways it hadn't been before. My brother continued to operate under the illusion of control, unaware of the full extent of my influence. Every decision he made was filtered through the systems I commanded. Every outcome a reflection of the precision and foresight I had employed. The impact was clear. Power could be wielded silently, invisibly, and devastatingly, and my brother had no choice but to acknowledge it. Even if only subconsciously, I had executed the next wave of my revenge flawlessly. The algorithm was not just a tool. It was a testament to skill, patience, and the quiet dominance that comes from being underestimated. And as I watched the world continue to move around me, I knew that while the immediate battle had been won, the war for total control and ultimate recognition was far from over. The weeks that followed the second wave of control were quiet, but heavy with consequences. The office operated flawlessly, clients were satisfied, and the profits were higher than ever. But behind the polished exterior, the fallout of my actions rippled through the company and my family in ways that were impossible to ignore. My brother, once so confident, now moved cautiously, carefully weighing every decision. He had lost the arrogance that made him reckless, but he had also lost something else. The unquestioned control he had taken for granted for years. Employees began to notice subtle changes as well. Meetings ran smoother, decisions were executed faster, and the company culture shifted toward efficiency and precision rather than panic-driven improvisation. Yet, no one knew who was truly orchestrating these improvements. I remained in the shadows, a silent force, ensuring that operations not only recovered, but improved. The fallout wasn't just financial or operational, it was psychological. My brother, the team, and even longtime clients were forced to confront the fact that appearances could be deceiving, and that skill and knowledge often outweigh titles and inherited authority. At home, the tension was even more palpable. Family gatherings became awkward and strained. My brother's attempts at reconciliation were half-hearted, filled with veiled resentment and forced smiles. He couldn't openly admit the truth, that I had become the indispensable one, the architect of his success, and the one holding the empire together. It was a silent, bitter acknowledgement that my influence could never be ignored. Every conversation, every interaction, carried the weight of unspoken truths. Yet, amidst the fallout, I also found an unexpected clarity. I realized that revenge, when executed with precision and patience, does more than settle scores. It teaches lessons, strengthens character, and reshapes relationships. My actions had shown that power is not given, it is earned, understood, and maintained. Loyalty and family ties, once taken for granted, now had a new meaning: respect, skill, and competence had to accompany them, or they carried no weight at all. Even my brother's personal life reflected the consequences. Friends who once admired him began to notice his hesitations, his overcautious decisions, and his inability to act without consulting others, or without being aware of hidden oversight. His image of invincibility had fractured, replaced with a subtle but undeniable dependence on the very person he had tried to dismiss. And though he never openly acknowledged it, the unspoken understanding between us was clear. I had turned the tide, and he had no choice but to follow. For me, the fallout was mixed with satisfaction and reflection. I had achieved what I set out to do: demonstrate the power of strategy, patience, and skill. But I also understood that true victory isn't about humiliation. It's about lasting influence and control. I had reclaimed my self-respect, solidified my professional authority, and, perhaps most importantly, redefined my relationship with my brother and the empire we had once shared. As I observed the company continue to thrive under my invisible guidance, I reached out to the audience once more. Have you ever turned a moment of betrayal into an opportunity for growth? I asked. If you haven't, take note. Patience, intelligence, and careful strategy can transform even the deepest betrayal into long-term advantage. Subscribe for more stories like this, where every misstep by others becomes a lesson in mastery. The fallout had changed everything. My brother had been humbled, the company was stronger, and I had demonstrated in both subtle and undeniable ways the true meaning of power. And as I prepared for the next phase of my journey, I knew one thing for certain: those who underestimate skill and patience never see the consequences coming. In the end, the empire my brother thought he controlled had never truly belonged to him. Every decision, every success, every system that kept the company alive was a testament to the years I had spent building, protecting, and mastering it. He had believed that authority was inherited, that family loyalty was automatic, and that my contributions were replaceable. But reality has a way of humbling even the most arrogant. I had turned betrayal into power, resentment into opportunity, and a missed birthday into a masterclass in patience, strategy, and control. My brother learned a lesson he would never forget. Skill, intelligence, and foresight cannot be replaced by arrogance, titles, or bloodlines. And while he retained his position, the knowledge that he was no longer in full command reshaped every interaction, every decision, every plan he attempted to execute. For me, the victory was quieter, yet infinitely more satisfying. I didn't need to publicly humiliate him or destroy the company to assert my dominance. The subtle control I had exercised, the invisible hand guiding every operation, was enough. I had reclaimed my dignity, established my authority, and most importantly, proven to myself that patience and strategy are more powerful than impulsive rage. Looking back, I realized this wasn't just a story about revenge. It was a story about self-respect, intelligence, and resilience. It was about understanding that sometimes the best response isn't immediate retaliation, but careful observation, calculated action, and the courage to wait until the timing is perfect. And to everyone watching this story unfold, remember, betrayal can be devastating, but it can also be transformative. Every slight, every insult, every act of dismissal carries an opportunity. If you choose patience, strategy, and precision, you can turn even the most painful betrayals into lasting victories. I'm Orion Cade Whitlaw, and this is the story of how skipping a birthday party led to controlling a $940 million algorithm, reshaping not only a company, but the understanding of power, family, and respect. If you found this story inspiring or eye-opening, make sure to subscribe for more tales of calculated revenge, resilience, and the hidden power in patience. And tell me in the comments, have you ever turned a betrayal into your advantage? I read every single message and I can't wait to hear your stories.